Be back again for the doctrinal conference this year. And more or less the theme we're considering is kind of the communism, and not communism so much itself, but the practical side of communism in its application to basically the fulfillment of the prophecy of Our Lady of Fatima that Russia will spread her errors throughout the world. And that means spread her errors throughout every aspect of our world. Now we are 103 years after Fatima, 1917, and the errors have spread completely. And the communist thinking, the communist way, the communist spirit has entered into every aspect of society. So that when Our Lady of Fatima said Russia spread her errors throughout the world, it means not just physically, but ideologically. And that not only amongst communists themselves, but also amongst anti-communists, non-communists, and specifically we're interested in Catholics. That the ideology of communism has entered into the Catholic Church, and now it has found its way, of course, into Catholic tradition. And that communism, and of course the challenge of this presentation is not fully prepared in the manner that we had liked and wanted to do, because it's very difficult to put together all the details. But so we have the concepts, the general concepts, but as far as the details, there may be some deficiencies in the application of the details. But in any case, so we'll consider here this basic presentation primarily not so much on the ideology or the theology of communism, which can be summarized in 3 words, which equals the dialectical atheistic materialism, right? So that's what the communism is. It's the dialectical atheistic. Can't see that, as long as you know it's there. Dialectical. You can't see that, can you? That's all the new markers are supposed to get me. No new markers. Okay, dialectical. Atheistic. Well, I guess atheistic could be first. Materialism. And we reached the point of this, that's what the essence of communism is, what's atheistic, dialectical materialism, there's these 3 elements, and that these 3 elements are all over our world today. The atheistic, for instance, is in the Catholic Church and in Catholic tradition and inside of our Catholic families. The dialectical is in the Catholic Church, inside Catholic tradition and inside our Catholic families, and the materialism. And here our focus on materialism is the philosophical meaning of the word. That the material as opposed to the formal, right? So that materialism. And so that these 3, to understanding these 3 words correctly, is a way to understand the structure and the order of our world today. And that there are 2 sides of it. Okay, Mario, did you exit? Right? There are 2 sides of it, right? And then the what do you call it? 2 sides of this dialectical atheistic materialism. One side, of course, is the ideological side, the ideas, but the other side is the practice. But when we talk about materialism, as an example, materialism, there's material and formal. Material and formal, we're going to go to a little Father Hess explanation here, because I was even considering playing for you a talk. Yuri Bezmenov is his name, Yuri Bezmenov, who I'm using as actually my foundation for this presentation on communism. And he was a communist himself, who defected in the early 1980s from Russia to the United States or to Canada, and he explained what communist subversion and communism is all about, and explains very well the process of subverting a society, that there is an order to subversion. And this order to subversion, remember that all that it really is, we call it communism today, but Pope Innocent III called it Satanism. Satanism. Because this is the way that Satanism manifests itself today. Atheistic dialectical materialism, and that remembering what the teaching of Pope Innocent III on Satanism equals the simple, what is Satanism and what is the satanic? Satanic equals destruction, ripping things apart. The word Satan means enemy. We got to understand the word enemy is a primarily negative concept. That the enemy is one whom we hate and wish to destroy. Satan is the enemy. The word Satan simply means enemy. What is he the enemy of? He's the enemy of God, and he's the enemy of God's creation, that which God has created. And what is the essence of God's creation? Harmony in diversity, order, unity. We have multiple parts of the world, and they are united. God made one world with millions and millions of parts. The devil is the enemy. He's the enemy of that one world created by God, and the way that he is the enemy of that world is by ripping apart all its parts. So to take a grenade and throw it into a room and it to explode is satanic. To blow something up, to destroy. However, that's not Satanism. Satanism is not just destroying things, but this is important to realize. Satanism, according to Pope Innocent III, back in the 1200s, he died in 1215, so shortly before he died. Satanism equals the ordered destruction of all order. They understood this very well in the Middle Ages. We don't understand it well now. It's the ordered destruction, two key words, ordered and all. The devil is not against religion. He's not against supernatural spirituality. He is against all of God's order, including the atom. He wants to explode the atom. He wants to, hence the atomic bomb. He wants to explode all the atoms in the universe. He wants to explode all the molecules and every single structure from an amoeba up to the guardian angels and the highest angels. He wants to destroy all order. Very important to remember that. The destruction of all order, not just spiritual and supernatural order. Also, he said it's an ordered destruction. It's not just destruction, and it's not just disordered. The average family is disordered, and the average kid is mobile destruction. But the kid is not satanic, and neither is the family satanic. What makes satanic equals an ordered, reasoned destruction, and not of just some order, but all order. Because when we want to kill a disease, we want to kill the disease, but we want to preserve the family, the structure. We must understand that the Satanist wants to destroy everything. In fact, later on, in case I forget when we get to that point, there are 4 stages of subversion. The 3rd stage is destabilization. And the 4th stage, when you begin normalization, the final stage of the new order, which we now call the new normal, that final stage, the first thing you do, you kill everybody who destabilized. The revolutionaries kill revolutionaries. So, and when you get to that stage, those who destabilize, they understand exactly how to destroy things, precisely what they are doing, and they are destroyers. Once the destruction has happened, then they look for their pay. And they come in for their paycheck, and they receive cyanide. They come in for their paycheck and they receive a bullet. They come in for their paycheck and they get fired. But they will not be the leaders of the new society. In fact, one thing that Yuri Bezmenov points out, very often the destabilizers, when they realize that they're not going to be the kings of the new kingdom, they become strong anti-communists. Very often they do that. Partly because they realize they were deceived, and more importantly because they realize if they don't, they're dead. In fact, Yuri himself, he came over to the United States, to Canada, because he came across some secret notes in which some of his missing friends, he found out, were missing dead because they knew too much. And he realized he knew too much, so that means it's time to find a new home. And so that part of the reason why he defected is because he realized that if he didn't, he would no longer be on this planet. And so that, but remember the key words we're focusing on here: materialism in its philosophical meaning. What does materialism mean? That means the stuff. And ordered and all. Materialism, ordered, and all. And we'll notice that the dialectical and the atheistic is going to be in every kind of material, and the destruction, the ordered destruction, is going to be in every kind of thing. And also, we want to note that not everyone who is organized in destruction is themselves necessarily a Satanist or a communist or a Mason. You will discover as Masonry succeeds, as Satanism succeeds, and as communism succeeds, non-communists have been trained how to think like a communist. Non-Satanists have been trained to act like a Satanist. And non-Masons have been trained to think and act like Masons. And so therefore, you don't need a Mason and a Satanist and a communist to guide them. So you will discover that as time progresses, many non-communists and many non-Satanists, etc., and non-Masons will do a better job of communism, Satanism, and Masonry than the Masons themselves could do. And that's the goal. One of the points of communist subversion is that when you're going to subvert any organization, materially you generally need about 3% of the population to be communist. 3% is sufficient. After the 3% has done its work, then 80%, never 100%, but far more than the vast majority, 80 to 90%, but it'll never be 100. 80 to 90% of the people will follow the communist way without having to be directed. And so that's the goal of the subversion in its conclusion. And so in any case here, we consider so Chris put this together for me here. In any case, so this has multiple names. We'll just go through, first of all, Uri here, because our focus is not so much on the theological side, but its application. So that, remember, by the way, before continuing here, atheistic dialectical materialism, of course, is the teaching of Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels. Karl Marx, in 1848, wrote his Communist Manifesto. And as was pointed out by some studiers of communism, we consider the Communist Manifesto is not primarily an ideological or theological or philosophical document, even though it is. But rather, the importance of the communist is that he lives his communism, that he puts it into practice. So the ideology has already been put in the minds of the majority of people, and now it's time to put it into practice. So the engine of the modern world has been constructed. The automobile of the modern world has been constructed. Now all we need to do is pour the gas into it, put a guy behind the steering wheel, and drive it. So the preparation has already been done. And this preparation began with William of Ockham in 1300, and it continued through the Protestant Reformation or Deformation period. And then that the father of this atheistic dialectical materialism is Hegel, who is a dialectical idealism. And he laid the formula of how this works. And this formula is not really from Hegel, it's actually from the devil. As remember also, as the old missionaries used to point out very clearly everywhere, when they go to India, when they go to Africa, when they go anywhere, they make it very clear, every religion that is not the true religion is Satan's religion. And every doctrine that is not Christ's doctrine is Satan's doctrine. So many of the Arius was a heretic, and so was Jansen, and so many others, and they all thought they came up with a unique and novel idea. All they did was repeat what a devil told them. That's all. We recognize that there is only one truth, and this truth is given to us by God, and this truth is not only idea, this truth is reality. So we say this board, for instance, it is true. It's verum. It's true. Truth is when that whiteboard or blackboard goes into your brain. Truth is when your brain is equal to the board. That's inside your brain. True is what's out there in reality. And so the true is all created by God. And the truth, whenever you know the truth, you're connected to God, at least indirectly. All false religions are lies, and the father of all lies equals Satan. So that even though we say Marx is the atheistic dialectical materialism, he's just simply repeating what Satan told him. And before him was Hegel. And Hegel explained, his teaching is the dialectical idealism. We're going to see this process of dialectical idealism. And that is, first you have a thesis. And as Karl Marx will say in the very beginning of the Communist Manifesto, he says, the history of man and the story of man is the story of class struggle. Those are his first words. The story of man is a story of somebody against somebody else, employer against employee. So the proletariat against the worker. Proletariat against the bourgeoisie. The bureaucracy against the lower ones. The kings against the peasants. And then every single story of man is against. So if you come into marriage, what do you discover? Well, there's a husband in many marriages and there's a wife. Used to be that way in marriage once upon a time. So that there would be a husband and a wife. So you discover that there's a man and a wife. What is it? It's a struggle of the man against the wife against the man. You discover there are children. What is that? It's a struggle between the parents against the children and the children against the parents. And so every single thing is a struggle. And all he's doing is pointing out the application of Hegel. And you have first a thesis, and immediately there is an antithesis, an antithesis. And they fight each other, and out comes a synthesis. Now, this is done by the process of random chance. And so what this teaching is essentially evolution. In fact, all that we're going to be talking about today is evolution. Evolution is the error and heresy of our times. It's the foundation of everything. So thesis, antithesis, synthesis. What you're supposed to believe is somebody says that gives a thesis that there is a God who made all things and controls all things, and no man has any free will. And then there's an antithesis, which is there is no God, and everybody does whatever they want. And there's a synthesis, which is there is a God, but he doesn't control everything. We have a mixture between the God that controls everything and fate and man who has a free will. And so we have a God of fate mixed with a man with free will, and we have modern religions of Christianity and so on. But then that's a new thesis, and there's an antithesis. And then there will come from that a synthesis, until eventually we'll discover that everything actually came only out of the mind of man. Now, the lie is there's a thesis, an antithesis, and a synthesis, and it just happens naturally. But that's not at all what happens. The reality is it's organized so that the modern way of saying it is problem instead of saying thesis. Problem. This problem is created, artificial. Then there is a reaction. The reaction is organized, but it's sincere. And then there is solution. And the solution is directed by the guy who created the problem. So we're working with human beings with free will. There's a problem, reaction, solution. Philosophically, thesis, antithesis, synthesis. The problem. So you may have heard about the Music Man. Music Man was a communist. And the Music Man, what he did was, I travel from city to city, and all I do is find out what the problem is in that city. I then emphasize the problem. And the parents react. Your kids are all becoming juvenile delinquents. Your kids are all going to hell in a handbasket. Your kids are all being ruined. The parents say, we've got to do something about that. What's the solution? Get them in a boys' band. And that means give me money so that I can buy the instruments for the boys' band. And I promise you the boys' band. And they give him the money, and then before the instrument shows up, he figures he might as well go to a new town where they're going to have another problem. And he exits town, steals their money, and goes. What did he do? He went into the town, and he tried to find a problem. Now, the difficulty that he had in River City, Iowa, there were no problems. They were so boring people that there were no problems. And so he said, well, if there's no problem, I need to create a problem. I'm going to create a problem. Now, the advantage of creating a problem is that you can direct. When you create a problem, you can predict the reaction. And then when you predict the reaction, you're able to get the synthesis to the solution. So this is the process. Problem. Deal with a real problem or create a fake problem, like, for instance, a pandemic, a coronavirus. You deal with a real problem or you deal with a fake problem. Then you plan the reaction. You do not create the reaction. Remember, we're dealing with free wills here. So the reaction part depends on how good you are as an infiltrator, as a subverter, to create the right kind of problem, to get the right kind of reaction, so that you can guide them to the solution that you already have. So when the traveling salesman in the West, he had the elixir of life. And the elixir was prepared to solve whatever problem you have. So he would discover what your problem is. He will explain how his elixir is going to solve that problem. And then you're going to react and go to the direction that he wants. We've got to remember that the problem, the thesis, antithesis, synthesis, is a teaching of evolution and the teaching of Hegel. And it's also even the teaching of Marx, that this stuff happens naturally. And this stuff and all we're doing is going along with the people and the culture. Recognize these things are not happening naturally. They are being ordered. And they are, in fact, what Innocent III calls Satanism. Ordered destruction of all order. Now, don't forget that we are not God. We are human beings. You may want to eat an entire cow. So you kill a cow, you put him in your freezer. You can't eat him at breakfast. But what you can do, you can store him, you can freeze him, and over the course of 6 months or 1 year, you can eat the whole cow. And you can only eat him in small bites, in small portions. And you're going to treat one part of the cow differently than another. And you'll be able to eat the entire cow. But you must eat him bit by bit, piece by piece. And so it is with the devil's destruction of the society of the kingdom of Christ. His destruction is ordered, and it goes bit by bit and piece by piece. And the focus here of Yuri Bezmenov and ours is the process of how you go from one level of destruction to the next level of destruction. So we're at the level of everyone's Catholic, everyone believes in God, everyone knows there's only one true religion, everyone knows the devil is evil, everyone knows they need to stay out of mortal sin and live according to the life of God, and they must accept the sacred scripture and all the teachings of the fathers, and that Christ must rule in their family, Christ must rule in their city, in their kingdom, and in their individual lives. Everyone accepts that 800 years ago. How do you go from that to where we are today, where it's illegal to go to church because it's unsafe? So how did you get from 800 years ago, you can't be without church, to now church is dangerous? That journey was the repeated process of subversion. And also one thing that Yuri Bezmenov says, one of the weaknesses of Western training is no one learns how things work. They just memorize stuff and vomit it out on a test. They don't understand how things work. They don't learn how to think. They don't learn how to function. So here, ideological subversion. So that this is the communists are trained this in their schools, so how to go out and subvert. Recognize, there's going to be a 4-step process of making a new society. The 4 steps are easy to memorize. The first step is demoralization. The second step is destabilization. And then the third step is crisis. And the fourth step is normalization. Each step is shorter than the one that came before it. The first step of demoralization takes about 15 to 20 years. In fact, I remember when I joined the society, it was told to me, the Society of St. Pius X is against, modernism and all that. But the communists say it takes about 20 years to infiltrate an organization and change it and turn its direction. And this is what happened within the Society of St. Pius X. Infiltration, subversion, and turning it. And Yuri Bezmenov explains how that is done. Not in any way in which you would think. Now, so that demoralization, that's first stage. You go into a culture and demoralize it. Second stage, destabilize it. This takes about 5 years. Third stage, crisis. He says 6 weeks for the crisis. A brief period for the crisis. The fourth stage, solve the crisis and create a new normalized society and remove all the problems you had before. And then guess what you do? Repeat the process. The normalization becomes the new stage for another demoralization. And then another destabilization. And then another crisis. And then another new normal. And then guess what you do again? Repeat the process. It's like eating a cow. You can only take small bites. Or building a house. You can only put 1 brick at a time. Well, you put 1 brick, then you put 1 brick, then you put 1 brick. You never put 2. But eventually, you've got a wall, and eventually you've got a house, and eventually you've got a castle, and eventually you have an entire kingdom walled off. So, but all you're doing is 1 brick, you're never doing 2, 1 brick, and 1 brick. But the brick placement is organized, and the destruction of what's in the way is also organized. So and remember that we're dealing with free wills. This is a battle over the will. Like for instance, they mentioned here Sun Tzu in 544 BC. What is victory? When did you achieve victory? And the very important thing to remember, you do not defeat your enemy when you kill him. Then you just got somebody to bury and maybe some mulch, but you don't have much. You do not defeat your enemy when you kill him. You defeat your enemy when you kill his will to fight. When you conquer his will, he's no longer your enemy. When you conquer his mind, he now becomes your soldier. So we need to conquer the will of your enemy so that he's no longer able to fight. Then we need to conquer the mind of your enemy so that he will become your friend and your soldier. And then you have more soldiers, and then you have less enemies, and you continue to fight that way. It is not the goal of a conqueror to kill every one of his subjects. He needs to change the subject's mind and change the subject's spirit. So what is mass demoralization? To change the perception of reality of an enemy to such an extent that despite abundant evidence, no one is able to come to sensible conclusions in defending themselves. We need to make sure that this is the stage in which, before you make your attack, you need to have, this is the smoke stage. Before you make your attack, remember, 3% are going to be attacking 97%. So in order, before you make your attack, you need to demoralize and confuse your enemy so that he cannot make a proper and structured combat against you. And so one way to do that is to make your enemy have independent pockets of resistance. So that this case, Bishop Williamson is a great defender of communism in his practice, because he says the way to fight it is to be not organized. And the way to fight it is to have individual pockets fighting individually. And that method of defense is not effective. It doesn't work. So you're going to make your enemy not able to make sensible conclusions how to defend themselves. And then it's always destructive activity aimed to destroy the country, nation, geographic area of your enemy. So Yuri Bezmenov. And always, and here's an important thing to remember about espionage. Espionage is not secret. It says that this is part of the lie of communism, is that you create all kinds. You got 007. I think Chris, with his stuff, he decided to do that. I think he did that. What is this? See, he did that. There we are. This is not communism, and that ain't communism. Right? So these two, the spy, whatever, this is not communism, right? So they say that communism is not those things. The subversion is not that. Not blowing up bridges, not seeking out microchips, not seeking out the plans of the Firefox airplane, not just sharing state secrets, U-2 planes flying overhead. He said that has nothing to do with subversion. That is one of the lies. You get useful idiots to join the CIA. You get useful idiots to join the Anti-Communist League and become like 007 and look for the commies. Where are the commies? They are standing right in front of you. And they are not doing anything that is illegal, and they're doing nothing secret. So he says, remember, with regard to subversion, the key is always legitimate, always overt, that is open, never espionage. So how do you infiltrate a society? Don't spy. Don't sneak in the background. Operate openly and do whatever you can do according to the stage in which you are. So legitimate, overt, and open. Very important. Legitimate, overt, open, not espionage. And then you're going to get the enemy to destroy himself. This is done at each stage of the revolution. At every stage of the revolution, this happens. So, and remember also, they're teaching there's a two-way traffic. You got to remember, there's the subverter, the guy who knows what he's doing. But he can't forget there's the receptive target. There's the person you're working on subverting. Is he receiving the information? Is he changing his thinking? Is he going in the correct direction? Very important to have a sufficient patience here. Patience is very important. It took hundreds of years to get where we are right now. And so that there is a two-way traffic. Remember, there's a subverter. There's the bad guy who's teaching the others how to go away from where they should be and how to change their thinking. And then there's a receptive target. So in the Catholic Church, for instance, in the last several hundred years, The subverters will never, ever become heretics. They will always make sure they aim at Protestantism without being Protestant. That they aim at evolution without being evolutionist. That they aim at every wrong thing without being that thing. So that they cannot be condemned. But all they do is point the enemy, that is the Catholic, in the case of the Catholic Church, the American citizen, in the case of the United States, and every other citizen in every other country, away from anything that's good, away from anything that's true. And you don't, and then let them be the ones to get executed, let them be the ones so anyway, this year is a little different than what we prepared. But those are just some of the movements. Because you see that here's an example of subverter, uncontrollable. What is he's doing? Propaganda of peace. He's trying to get them to react with pacifism. He controls both sides of the movement, but that's something that's didn't prepare that. Here are the steps: demoralization, destabilization, crisis, normalization. These are the steps of subversion, right? And that demoralization, step 1, leading to destabilization, step 2, leading to crisis, step 3, normalization, step 4. And that right now we're in one of the crisis moments right now with this pandemic, the fake pandemic of the coronavirus. This is one of the stages we're in right now. We're in a crisis. We will have multiple crises, but there are crises that happen haphazardly. These are not the crises that we're interested in. These are organized crises. In the protocols of the elders of Zion, written, they met together in 1890 or so. They said, we will destroy Christianity in the modern world, and we're going to go through these steps. And they went through the protocols of their steps. And the final step is, we will, after demoralizing, we will destabilize, we will create the entire crisis. We will create a fake crisis. Because it's a fake crisis controlled by us, we will create a global crisis before a one-world government takes over. Then we will tell people, do you want to get out of this crisis? Do you want to get out of this difficulty? Then you must surrender your freedoms and be completely obedient to us. And if you accept that, we will stop the crisis. And then there'll be a new society run by the Jews, run by those that are going to prepare the way for the Antichrist, by the one-worlders. And that because they know what they're preparing for. These 4 stages do require structure. They require preparation. You know, so that and then how that it works. This is Uri here, and then the 1980s, and so the demoralization stage. Demoralization: educate an entire generation in Marxist ideology. It's going to take time. It takes 20 years. Patiently educate. They will become the leaders of the next stage. Then you destabilize, create a crisis, and then you get a new period of stability. Then, of course, and you'll repeat the whole process. And that there's, you know, and you got to understand what you're doing at each stage. So then, the first stage here, the demoralization stage. So more or less 15 to 20 years, time sufficient to educate one generation. So you go back to the 1800s, and in the side of the Catholic Church and in the Western civilization, what was done in the 19th century was a focus on education, 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 education. And the idea that was presented everywhere in the world is the reason why there is evil in the world is because people are ignorant. Not malicious, but ignorant. So that all sin is essentially and primarily because of ignorance. Therefore, the way to get rid of sin is to educate, educate, educate. So in the 19th century, everyone's going to be intelligent, and John Dewey is going to create a public school system for the United States, and there's going to be education throughout the entire world. I remember reading in the Kentuckian magazine, and sometime in 1993, I think it was. They had a magazine called the Kentuckian, and it was an interview that was done in 1893. an interview in 1893 and done everywhere in the United States, but Kentucky was one of the places, so they wrote down the results of this interview. And the interviewers were asking, what do the common people think the world's going to be like 100 years from now in 1993? And the universal response was, it's going to be better than Utopia of St. Thomas More. It's going to be so wonderful that it's going to be unimaginable how happy, loving, and peaceful everyone's going to be. That was the universal response. And the reason was essentially the same. Two reasons. One, education, and two, material prosperity. Because of these two reasons, in 1993, there will be no problems and no evil in the world. And here's how the explanation more or less went. And it was almost a universal response. There were very few naysayers. So in 1893, in this survey that was done throughout the United States and maybe other places as well, and that was reported in the Kentuckian magazine, I think it was 93, and he said that, well, right now in 1893, technology is developing. Steamships and the telegraph wire, and that we have, for instance, starvation happening throughout the world. So when the word comes to 1993 that the Africans are starving, or the Americans are starving, or the Asians are starving, because of communication, there's never a famine everywhere in the world. We're also developing ways of producing crops so much more plentiful than before, with the invention of tractors and combines and the new ways of planting. We're going to have so much food that we'll have more food than can be eaten by all human beings on earth. And so if there is a starvation in Africa, then food will be transported from the United States to Africa. And also, wars will go to almost nothing, because the reason for wars is misunderstandings between kings. With modern transportation being what it is, and with modern communication, the development of the telegraph and later on the telephone and so on, there will be clear communications between kings and between kingdoms, and therefore, because of clear communications, there will no longer be a need for wars. Armies will become smaller and smaller. And due to communications, and due to the, the prosperity of the whole world and a greater material abundance, because you fight because you're starving, you fight because you need stuff. But because of the global economy, we're going to discover in 1993 that food and supplies can be transported everywhere in the world, so that anyone can have any good from any other place in the world, wherever they are. And hence there will be no need for war due to communications, due to material prosperity, and also due to the fact of education, because all children will be educated by a free education system. Being educated, they will not be backwards, they will not be violent, they will not be criminals, and there will be a beneficial and beautiful society. Now, these ideas are now deep in our society. Whenever you have a problem, what do they say in every marriage? What's your problem? We got a problem of a lack of communication. And that started in the 1800s. And if you asked a girl in 1233 why she hated her husband, she wouldn't say it's because of lack of communications, because he's him. That's good enough reason. There's no need to have a lack of communication. But now, everything is going to be in one of these three categories. If there's a problem, it's because of lack of communication. If there's a problem, it's because of lack of education. If there's a problem, it's because of lack of supplies. If we only had enough to feed our families, we would not be aborting children. If we only had enough to feed our families, we'd be having 30 kids also. It's because we don't have enough money and because we don't have enough things. So in the 1800s, those ideas, which are communist ideas, materialistic ideas, atheistic ideas, are put into the minds of men. Now we're over 100 years of that garbage in the brain. And it's entered into the Catholic Church as well. Why are they heretics? Well, even though there's a partial truth to this, it's because nobody knows the truth. All you got to do is educate them. Why are they all heretics? Because they're not educated, because there's a lack of communication, and they're afraid of loss of material prosperity. Now, these can be small factors, but we're forgetting about the human will, we're forgetting about the grace of God, and we're forgetting about the fact that there is a structure that's not just creating these lies, but heading us towards more and more lies until eventually all human beings become slaves of only one ruler. We're going to shape the outlook and personality of the individuals. We're going to brainwash the next generation. This is what's done. So in the Society of St. Pius X, we're going to shape outlook, personality, brainwash, and then what are the method? And you also hear that, this is notes from the talk I was going to consider playing to you. It's about an hour long, of Yuri Bezmenov back in 1984. But that he says, the Tactics of Judo. He says, when you're fighting against someone, he says, in any culture, when you're fighting against someone who's bigger than you, when he punches you, if you resist the blow, if you try to resist the blow, it will be very painful, and you may not be effective. However, what you do is you take hold of his blow, and you bring it and crash him against the wall. Now, one of the first things that communists do when they enter any culture, they discover in every single society, there are always people against that society. No matter where you go, there's going to be someone who hates the boss, someone that hates the king, and there'll be various reasons why they hate the president, why they hate the king, why they hate the priest in charge, why they hate whoever they hate. They're going to have various different reasons. What you do is you take all those reasons and you aim them in the same direction. Get them to work together. Get them to work together. Now, you then use that to crash and destroy the society. So an example, I wanted to go in stages, but we'll see what happens. As an example, the conservative movement in the Catholic Church. How does a communist subverter enter into that movement? He sees that there are many people that hate the new Mass. And they hate Pope Paul VI, and everybody hates Pope Francis. And that they hate the bad things going on in the church. And there are many different movements. Some hate it because of the lack of faith. Some hate because of the whole problem of Vatican II. Some hate because of the immorality, because of the fact that he said that when divorced can remarry, can receive Holy Communion. Some hate because he's from South America. They have all kinds of different reasons why they hate. Take them all and put them together in one common reason. Like Kennedy said, we all breathe the same air back in the 1960s. We are all mortal and we all breathe the same air. So that we're going to find what we have in common. This is the demoralization phase. Let us consider what we have in common. Let us forget our differences. Why are they doing that? Because we're going to take all those movements that are punching in different directions, we're going to get them to aim in the same direction and use that to destroy the culture, to destroy the civilization. So, and how is that done? Overtly, not covertly, openly. So the communist subverter, for instance, he's going to support openly whatever the slightly left opinion is. Whatever the slightly more liberal opinion is, or whatever the slightly worse thing to do is, he's going to support it, and he's going to get people behind him. So that right now, for instance, with regard to the election of Trump, for instance, when he was elected in 2016, he was elected primarily for one purpose. Everybody hated Hillary. And that we may not like everything that Trump stands for, everything that Trump does, but everybody hates Hillary. And they realize Hillary is worse. So we're going to gather together in order to elect Trump. So that the communists are able to take anything, including their enemies, and especially their enemies, to use their anti-communism to foster communism, or their anti-Satanism to foster Satanism, anti-Masonry to foster Masonry. So if you can take your enemy and control his movement, this is important. You avoid the strike, and you direct the movement to a desired goal. So this could be 2 points here. First, avoid the strike. The example that I was leading to in the conclusion, but we'll see what, because I don't have, unfortunately, I wasn't able to lay out the full structure of all these talks, but so I got all of it together in one. So to avoid the strike with regard to our faith, for instance, to avoid the strike, that means don't let them attack the center of the Death Star. What did Luke blow up? What was that thing called? You search your feelings, Luke. What is that called, the center of the Death Star? The main control system? This is important theology here. Logan, you know. What is it? The reactor. Okay. The main reactor. Okay. See, I had Logan in our theology class, and I had a whole bunch of philosophers sitting there, and I asked him a philosophy question. He was visiting. Not one of them knew the stinking answer. And Logan got it. Bang, right? So you're a born theologian, Logan. So we'll get you. Good. Okay, the reactor. Okay. So you got to blow up the central reactor, and that blows up the Death Star. Now, what happened is avoid the strike. This is very important. What is the communist or the Satanist or the modernist, whoever the bad guy is, what is his weakest point? What's the reactor, the core reactor, that if you get that, you blow up his whole operation? Make sure nobody's shooting at that. And here, Yuri Bezmenov points out very well, you've got to understand the purpose. He didn't study St. Thomas Aquinas, but St. Thomas Aquinas points out a principle, and a principle we try to pound in the head of our guys. In omnibus, that's the omnibus, that's a German bus, I think it's called that. In omnibus, in all things, respice finem. Very important. In all things, every little detail, respice, look to the end. So I point this out in our pickup games. When we're playing basketball, we're playing soccer. You know, you're supposed to bring the ball down the middle, and you're supposed to pass it off to the guy on the left, and he's supposed to send it across the middle. There's only one problem. You got a 700-pound paraplegic who can't move in the goal. What do? You just kick the ball in. He ain't going to block it. In omnibus respice finem. In all things, look to the end. The object is not to make beautiful passes. The object is to score. Now, if the goalie decided to go and take a drink, which happens sometimes because we get really motivated, dedicated guys. If the goalie decided to go and take a water break, you don't need to pass the ball. Just score. And if you're going to pass the ball over to the left side, and that's where Pele is playing defense, don't do that. Pass it over the other way. In omnibus respice finem, finem, finem. And great coaches are able to teach their students how to play fundamental basketball, fundamental football, fundamental whatever the sport is, and recognize who your enemy is, recognize what your strengths are, what their weaknesses are, and remember what the goal is, and make adjustments. In omnibus respice finem. What is the end? Now, the ultimate end, of course, is for the devil to bring souls to hell and for God to bring souls to heaven. But what is the proximate end? Every single stage has an end or a purpose. When we come in to build this building, the first stage is clean out all the garbage, level out the ground. So that means you're going to get shovels, you're going to get whatever you need. You're going to bring in bulldozers. You're going to do a lot of different things to level this ground. In the next stage, you're not going to use shovels. You're not going to use bulldozers. You're not going to use some guys that only know how to destroy things. You're going to send them on vacation. Then you go to the next stage and you start constructing. Why? The same reason why you brought in the goon to tear things up It's the same reason why you're bringing in the craftsmen to finish the construction, that is to build something. And each one has its stage. So what is this, the demoralization stage? The purpose is not to build a communist society, not to build a satanic society. That's later. The purpose is to demoralize the existing society. So a point that Yuri points out in education, for instance, make sure you avoid the strike. So hand out PhDs in what? Anything. They can study buttons, they can study health foods, they can study, anything. Health foods, buttons, the importance of, the black race, the white race, anything as long as it's not about communism or not about the heresies. In our example, for instance, in the Catholic Church, as a communist infiltrator, what do you want to do? You want to make sure that they are complaining about anything about Vatican II except what matters. Don't attack religious liberty. Don't attack the theology of religious liberty. Don't attack the theology of ecumenism. Don't attack the errors and heresies of Vatican II directly. Don't allow that. But allow anything else. Talk about, for instance, the importance of how bad it is to receive communion in the hand. Talk about how bad it is to have altar girls. Talk about how bad it is to be disrespectful on the altar. Talk about how bad it is to wear burlap vestments. Talk about how bad it is to use the wrong kind of incense to use in satanic ceremonies. Talk about any of those types of things and flood the market with all these abuses. But avoid the strike. So you're directing the movement to a desired goal. Talk about things that are straw men. Talk about things that are secondary. Talk about things you can afford to lose. And avoid the central reactor. That's this stage. We're not going to directly fight these bad guys yet. We're just going to destroy the strength of our enemy. That's stage one. That is the satanic stage one, demoralization stage one. And it continues all the time. Avoid the strike, direct the movement to a desired goal. So that the enemy crashes into a wall himself. He's going to be the one who crashes into a wall himself. And then take many movements of the society, we just talked about that, which are against the society, criminals, crazy people, people against anything, and direct them towards one goal. Like the Black Lives Matter going on right now. So Black Lives Matter, all these different movements, whichever one, doesn't matter. They don't care about black lives. They don't care about white lives. They don't care about anybody's lives. In fact, they want them all to be eliminated. Just take whatever you can to direct it to destroy the existing society. Very important. Then the result, the demoralized person. What is the demoralized person? What guy are you after? You want to create an enemy who still doesn't like you. There's going to be three enemies. The enemy that still hates you. The enemy that now doesn't think you're all that bad. And the enemy who you're going to turn into your future soldier. Now, the enemy that still hates you, he must be demoralized. That's what we talk about in war. He must believe he can't win. The enemy that's demoralized, he's got to realize that he's got no hope. He can't win. The second enemy says it's not even a fight. And the third enemy is going to join your side. This ensures victory. You haven't fired a gun yet. You haven't installed any of your direct false teaching yet. This is the preparatory and the most important phase, the demoralization phase. When this phase is done well, the destabilization and the crisis will have its effect and will have its result. And then, so in any case, in this period does take some time. Now, what are you going to be doing during this period? These are the notes of what's his name? Yuri Bezmenov. What are you going to do? This is related more directly to communism, but here's the basic points. You're going to go through every stage of society, and what are your goals? These are the ends. Ignorance. Education. What's the purpose of education? Make people ignorant. When you go to school, you may have a brain. When you go out, you're going to be stupid. So now we're going to make sure that that happens to you through the process of education. There are many ways of making you stupid. It doesn't matter how you do it. Permissiveness and relativity are two key points of education. You permit any kinds of immoral behavior, permit any kind of lies, and all truth is relative. Very important, education. And then the power of the media. This can be used at every level. And so religion, education, media, and culture. This is a communist way of destroying a civilization. Religion. Politicize, commercialize, and entertain. That's what you got to do. Politicize, commercialize, entertain. That's what you got to do with religion. And why? What's its purpose? The death wish of religion. And here it's interesting how Yuri the communist says, what's the purpose of religion? It is to make a proper relationship between man and the Creator, between man and God. Religion is religare, to bind again man and God. He is going to have to unite his whole life to God, and he is going to have to follow and obey God and direct all things to God. What do we want for that? The death wish of religion. You're going to take God out of religion, and you're going to make man the new God. That's what you're going to do with regard to religion. And this process, what are the methods to do it? Politicize, commercialize, and entertain. So politicize. The problem is this priest is bad, and that priest is bad, and this guy is bad, and that guy is bad, and these people are fighting each other, and they're all just fighting each other. Make it about people against people. Commercialize. The only purpose of religion equals to make money for the priests. That's it. And entertain. So that let the religion become cheap. When you go to Mass, in our version, for instance, when you go to Mass just to receive Holy Communion, and you go to Mass just to have the spiritual benefits of the Mass for yourself, that's making the Mass cheap. Because our Lord Jesus Christ died for the whole of humanity, and when he died as a soldier on the cross, fighting against the entirety of the kingdom of Satan. It was a rather global conflict that was going on the cross, which is the holy sacrifice of the Mass. And receiving Holy Communion does not always happen at Mass. You're not always able to receive Holy Communion. You do not receive Holy Communion at every single Mass. But the sacrifice is always there, and the sacrifice is a combat between the kingdom of heaven and the kingdom of hell, in which the kingdom of hell is defeated. And therefore the Mass is not just for me to get what I want. That is the death wish of the Mass. That's how you kill it. And it becomes like entertainment. And then to commercialize and politicize. Those three elements are in Catholic tradition now. They're going to put them into every single religion, every single, including the truth, and most importantly, the truth. Education, permissiveness, and relativity. Good example of that right now is the Michael Matt and the Unite the Clans. As long as we are together against Pope Francis, we're all Catholic, we have our little disagreements, but we're going to be together against Pope Francis. What's happening is we're going to pull together these movements, but in the wrong foundation, on the wrong foundation. And then with regard to education, monopolize, manipulate, discredit, and deal with non-issues, deal with secondary things, but a plethora of uselessness. It doesn't all have to be bad. Good example of that is with regard to Christmas. How did the Masons destroy Christmas? They went through this entire process of destroying Christmas. How do you destroy Christmas? You replace Christ with the abominable snowman, with the Frosty the Snowman, with the Grinch that stole Christmas, with Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer, and all kinds of other seemingly harmless things, so that your mind is filled with those things, and that Christ is dropped out of the picture. So that they're not going to all be directly evil things, but they're going to be things that, and then create culture, false heroes and false role models. That's the modern sports figures, and also now you're a hero if you deliver pizza. If you're a first responder, the heroes are delivering pizza. And the heroes are staying at home and doing nothing. And the heroes are the doctors and the nurses for the first responders, these are the heroes. And so we're going to create false heroes, false role models. And every level, it gets worse. It gets lower and lower, you know, and so that we're going to destroy the minds of individuals so that they themselves will police. One of the reasons why the face mask is so important is the face mask is a present test to see how far the demoralization has taken effect. How many people are ready to police so that the police don't have to do it? How many people are ready to execute their neighbor without a face mask? How many are able to kill their neighbor without a face mask? How many are able to make sure that everybody's got a face mask? They've got to be an obedient and responsible citizen. How many are going to believe it's a mortal sin if you don't have a face mask? How many are going to go to confession? Bless you, Father, for I've sinned, they didn't wear my face mask. How many of them are going to be doing that? It's a test. How effective was your demoralization? How many people are going to follow and be sheeple the new ideas? It's just a test. Then we'll see how we go to the next stage. You know, and then go through the stages of dealing with the law and order, social relations, security, international politics, and foreign, and so on. In any case, 41, we better stop here for a few minutes. We'll say a prayer, and then we'll take a 15-minute station break here. And then, so one thing I never do with the class, the bell rings and I never stop. This semester I said I'm going to stop when the bell rings, but it didn't happen. But in any case, but with you guys we'll do that. So even though it's after the time, we're supposed to stop about 11 minutes ago, but this is pretty good. We'll go ahead and stop, and then we'll take a 15-minute break, and then we'll start again. In the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Ghost. Amen. Glory be to the Father, and to the Son, and to the Holy Ghost. St. Vincent Ferrer, St. Jude, Lady of Victory, Lady of Sorrows, Lady of Christians, St. Ignatius, Father, Son, and the Holy Ghost. Amen.